to yet another Tech Lunch series. Today we've got Mark's Feed Store. That's an improvement over pizza, right? Someone said no. You're going to go back to the pizza? Okay. If you would like to check out today's video, it will be available tomorrow on humana.io, as all of our lunch talks are currently. We'd like to welcome Bill Holleran from GitHub to talk about Innersourcing.
Thanks. Hey. All right, so for those of you that may have not heard before, we're going to give away some semi-fabulous prize packages to be mailed to you. If you'd like to participate in the silly trivia game, please feel free to open up a device, go to kahoot.it and enter that PIN. We won't get started with questions right away. We'll bounce back over this here in a couple minutes so that folks can get a chance to get food, sit down, not have barbecue sauce on their fingers while they're answering the questions that might impact your ability to touch the right answer. So we'll go ahead and just kind of get started. As mentioned, I'm here to talk a little bit about collaborative enterprise development and InnerSource, and we'll unpack all of this stuff and essentially what it means. But my name's Phil Holleran. I'm a solutions engineer with GitHub. I've been a GitHubber, which is how we tend to refer to ourselves, for about 2 years. And a little bit about myself when I'm not a GitHubber. I live in Minnesota, about an hour outside of Minneapolis. It's cold a lot, so I find things to do to enjoy the cold. I like to get out and ski. I enjoy warm coffee and spending lots of time in the kitchen. And riding on my bike, whether there's 6 inches of snow or not. This helps to have really big tires. Thankfully, the kids are pretty resilient as well and enjoy the cold weather. And so we're here to talk about InnerSource, and I always like to find a little Randall Monroe humor that tends to go along with it. And really, you know, the person who's getting ready to get operated on wants somebody to just go ahead and wire a USB port to some nerves. Somebody at some point is going to create a patch for it so that they can use it. Like, we'll figure it out. Now, obviously, this is kind of the hope and pray method of InnerSource. You can open source. You hope somebody else is going to go and write the software for you. That isn't usually how things work. So let's talk about how things work. And really, the point that I want to make in this, we started talking about InnerSource and open source and what is all this stuff, is no matter the company that I go to or my colleagues go to and we talk with, most organizations struggle with awareness of existing enterprise development. And what do I mean by that? Well, organizations like Humana or large auto manufacturers or health insurance providers, anyone else, have developers and development talent in many disparate locations, whether we're talking about M&As, so you've got all sorts of folks coming in from all over the U.S., got contracted talent that's, you know, from India, from South Carolina, from wherever, or you just got people that exist in different buildings, different floors, different ends of town, all developing code and all contributing code to the IP that is owned by the organization. The challenge comes, where is that code, what's available to me, and how do I use it? So the best way to illustrate this is to talk about 2 stories. I'm working with a bank right now that's one of the big 10 banks in the country. About a year ago, they did an audit of all the web services that they have in use throughout the bank. And they found out that they have over 800 web service endpoints. And they found out that, going into those a little bit more further, about 50% of those were only being used by a single application or process. So this whole idea of microservices and reusable services really only works if those services are actually being used by more than one client. And then they also realized that a lot of that functionality in those services was duplicative, triplicative, quadruplicative, continued going on from there of functionality that existed elsewhere in the bank. And ultimately, the reason behind that is because no team knew what other teams had written. So you end up with a lot of libraries, a lot of services that do essentially the same thing, and a lot of teams spinning their wheels, reinventing the same thing over and over again when their software product could have been released quicker. And another customer example, a customer down in Tennessee had, I always forget if it was 3 or 5, I think it was 5 different authentication libraries that all authenticated to the same backend system. Again, the question, why? Nobody knew that somebody else had already solved that problem somewhere else in the company. So how do we deal with that, and what ends up kind of causing this? And part of it is just rooted in kind of the pitfalls of the classic vertical organization. You know, if you're a 10-person startup, it's pretty easy to know everything that's going on within software development in your company because you're intrinsically tied to it. Even the person at the top pretty much knows what's going on everywhere else. Of course, as we start growing as an organization, we put in these logical constructs because we have to organize people around some sort of centralizing principle. It's either business function, geography, technical discipline, whatever it might be. We start putting folks in these boxes, silos, however you want to think of them, because that's what we have to do to be efficient as entities, as companies. And inevitably, a lot of those have software development tied to them at one aspect or another. Whether we have centralized software development that's getting contracted out to those business units, or whether we have distributed software development in each of them, we've got developers very focused in on that core line of business. And then the question then becomes, well, how does a developer in one aspect of the business know about the code, know about the developers that exist elsewhere? And how do they correspond with one another, work with one another, take advantage of each other's work? If we were out in the open source world, we could go just search for whatever we're interested in, find the best library on GitHub.com for our purposes, go in, throw that into our package manifest, and be happy and continue moving along. That doesn't necessarily always translate directly to an enterprise environment because we may not have those tools in place. So we need to start addressing for some of these organizational challenges. And of course, as the organization grows in size, the challenge becomes that much greater. So we start looking at, an organization size of man, how do we start to identify talent, how do we identify individuals within that sea of people? So, as I mentioned, this is part of that struggle with existing enterprise development. So what we're going to spend our time talking about for the rest of this lunchtime is what is InnerSource and how does InnerSource respond to creating awareness and creating better practice around enterprise software development. Now, that said, I also mentioned that there'd be a mildly corny, fun quiz with a semi-fabulous prize package. So let's go ahead and start that out right now. Feel free, if you've not yet done so, go over to kahoot.it, enter that pin, and give a name that you'll be able to claim is you, and you'll be able to dispute anyone else and say, no, that's actually me and not them. And we'll get started. So let's go ahead and start. We're going to do 7 questions. We'll break it up in half here. And so our first question, GitHub Universe 2017 occurs in which month? This is our user conference that we host in San Francisco down at Pier 70. It's in an abandoned warehouse down by the water. Kind of freaks out your Uber driver when they take you there, but it's really cool, and it's a great way to come talk about software development for a few days. So which month? We've got 28 answers. 3, 2, 1. It's happening in October. So Will R. Where is Will R? Will R is currently the person to beat with Ash 15 close behind, wherever Ash happens to be. There she is. All right, next question. What is the name of GitHub's free open source text editor? Is it Electron, Energizer, OctoEdit, or Atom? And it is Atom. How many people here are using Atom by chance? Must be about 18 of you. Awesome. For those of you that don't know Atom, and as you're all here in the Digital Experience Center, Atom is a cool text editor. It and VS Code are both built on top of Electron, which is another open source framework created by GitHub and put up for folks to use. If you use Slack, the Slack desktop app is also written in that. What's cool about Electron is it lets you write cross-platform desktop applications using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So you can write it all in web technology and compile it into Mac, Linux, and OS X, which is pretty awesome. So moving on, we'll do one more question, then we'll come back a little bit later. True or false? Within GitHub Enterprise, there is a limit on the number of repositories you can create. We limit the number of repositories folks can have. 3, 2, false. Have as many as you like. All right, we'll come back to the remainder of the questions here in a little bit. Let's get back to talking a little bit more about InnerSource. So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, organizations start with awareness of existing enterprise development. And it's important to remember that when we talk about organizations and awareness of development, it's much more than just application developers. you've got a lot of different disciplines that are intrinsically tied and interested and vested in the success of software development. Whether we're talking about customer support, so you've got customer support both internal for internal applications and internal customers, and then you have the customer support reps that are handling client and public customer and member questions that are coming in for those applications. You've got executive leadership and you've got operations folks that are looking for the outcomes and driving, expecting software to deliver those outcomes for folks. You've got IT security that are looking to protect the source code here within Humana, while ideally being enablers and helping you use that technology that you want to use. You've also got domain experts. You've got people that are intrinsically interested in design and user experience and project management that all need to come together to speak a common language around software. And one of the other things that we tend to see is that the organizational distance between developers directly correlates to the number of bugs and the instances of delay. So what do I mean by organizational distance? If we go back to kind of that org chart before, if I've got to go through 8 layers of an org chart to get access to a developer, that's going to go ahead and that's going to increase the delay that I have. I've got to get 6, 7, 8, 9 approvals to get somebody to take a look at my code. And then the number of steps that are involved in between inherently cause more and more bugs because it's that delay, that distance that we have to jump over is just inserting lots of additional opportunities for problems, for issues, and failure into the process. So we're here talking about InnerSource, and then we're going to talk about the tenets of InnerSource, but really we're talking about the tenets of open source as well. So just as a kind of a term and a level set, let's talk a little bit about open source InnerSource. Open source software obviously has been around for a very long time. This is not a new concept to anyone. What's really been unique about open source software over about the past decade is the explosion in growth and maturity in a lot of those projects. Whereas open source software was much more obscure before, it's now operationalized in just about every company everywhere. Whether you're running MySQL databases, you're using a React.js framework, there's open source software everywhere. So what are the things that allowed open source software to grow and experience exponential growth, and how do we go ahead and then look at those tenets of open development and embrace those internally within our development environment and within our trusted firewall of developers here within a company is InnerSource. So the tenets are the same. We're really talking about development that's open, transparent, participative, collaborative. You could argue whether those two terms are the same thing or different, and governed. So let's talk a little bit about what is openness. When we're talking about things being open as a tenet of InnerSource and things should be open, software should be open, what do we mean by that? Because it's not quite the rainbows and unicorns and guitars and kumbaya that some people are afraid that it is, and that it's just this open Wild West playground. But it's really important that the process be open, and it starts really with repositories. Repositories, the code itself needs to be open for a number of reasons. We want people to be able to go in and find code and explore code. At first, you're probably looking for prior art. Has somebody already solved this problem within the company? If so, I'm going to go and I'm going to grab that and I'm going to use it to build my application somewhere else. Because surprisingly, the same workflows that people are so used to in open source. I need a database, I'm going to go grab MySQL. I need a middleware tier, this is going to work fine. I'll grab this, stitch it together, then I put my value add and orchestration on the top to make an application. Is an extremely foreign concept within a lot of core companies, that it's okay to make those repositories open because you want people going to the software parts bin to grab things that are already working, already stable, already maintained in order to speed time to market. I do a lot of work with auto companies, and I kind of describe it the same way, just as a car company is not going to design every part from scratch when they come out with a new model. They're going to go back to the parts bin, they're going to grab the steering wheel and wheels and stuff from other models that they've already done, create some unique parts, and they've got a unique car. That's the same thing with enterprise software development. It's a lot quicker, easier, and faster when we go back to the parts bin and say we need this, 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 and this. I'm going to extend this, I'll write this new piece, and now we've got our software. Then that gets us into the reuse. And the last bit why we want open repositories is contributions. So rather than go, oh hey, this gets me 80% of what I need off the shelf, I need to go rewrite a new one that has 100%. That's not really useful, that's not really efficient. So we want people going, finding that prior art, reusing it, and then recognizing this gets me 80% of the way. I'm going to go ahead and contribute the last 20% back to the project. So that it handles everything I need and I don't have to worry about that anymore in the future. Just like I contribute an upstream change to the Rails framework or to MySQL or something else so I don't have to manage it internally, I'm going to want to do the same thing with internal repositories. Let's just get in there, get it supported. When we talk about contributions, it's really important to recognize that contributions should be open as well. And contributions can come a number of different things. One, I mean, a contribution is the ability to go ahead and let's create a branch and let's propose a change. And an open contribution doesn't mean I can go ahead and force my change in without an approval. It just means I am free to propose a change, to propose a new direction, to propose something to the software. We then have governance in place to say, you've gone ahead and proposed a change, but what is it going to take to actually get your change operationalized? What are the standards we're looking for from your code in order to go ahead and hit merge? That might be test coverage. That might be spaces versus tabs. However pedantic you want to be, we're going to have some governance in place to make sure that not any proposed change gets in, but those that have gone through the process, those that meet the standards we're looking for and contribute to the direction of the repository. And then we're going to go ahead and we want to favor branches and protections over forks. And the reason we want to do that is primarily from a visibility perspective. So for those that are a little bit confused, forking in the open source world is great because if I want to go ahead and I want to work on Rails or I want to work on MySQL or .NET Core, whatever else it might be, I can go ahead and fork that repository, get it in my own namespace, monkey with it as much as I want to, and I never have to bother somebody who's a maintainer of the .NET Core framework to add me as a user and give me permissions. Now, here in this room, you all work at Humana, you all have centralized identity management. So rather than have everybody create their own fork of these repositories, which aren't indexed and aren't easily searchable, let's just give people the ability to go ahead and create their branch on that main repository, propose those changes. They're just not going to be able to merge that branch in. So that's where we talk about branches and protections workflow being really successful at InnerSource versus the forking model, which is a little bit different on the open source side. And when we talk about contributions, it's important to remember that the source code is merely an artifact in the process. There's a much greater process that's involved, a much more widely reaching process than just the code itself, and that process should be open additionally. So that's when we really start talking about transparency. So if the code is open, that's great. When the process is open, we're talking about things being much more transparent from end to end. And when we look at that process, it's really important that those processes are documented within the code. So what is the process that I need to go through to implement a change? Well, we expect you to create a branch for a feature, name it X, Y, Z, and have 95% test coverage and write stuff in this way. How do I know that? Well, it's got to be documented somewhere. There's got to be standards. It can't just be knowing who to talk to or going to a SharePoint site somewhere and trying to figure that out. It should be intrinsically tied with the code. And by having those processes in place, it gives us a lot of opportunity to be much more transparent about decision making as well. Because I'm sure we've all at some point had a really great idea and come into a meeting and been really super excited and say, hey, we need to go ahead and do this. And then the grizzled seasoned veteran who's been on the project for a while sits back and is like, we tried that a year ago and it didn't work. Oh, okay. Cut down a few notches, got my enterprise software development beating. Eventually, the enthusiasm will be gone. That's not what we're looking for, though. Instead, when we have that documented process, we have those expectations, and we have those historical artifacts we can go back and point to. You get somebody getting all excited, hey, we should do this. And you're like, we tried that a year and a half ago. Go take a look over here. It didn't work. And so you can actually go back and read through the old pull request and like, okay, yeah, that was a bad approach, that didn't work. And then you can either say, oh yeah, that makes sense, I'm not going to go down this path anymore. Or you can say, yeah, that was a year and a half ago. Now there's this new library, new tool, new pattern, whatever. It might be worth exploring this again. So we have context we can point back to. We have justification for our answers. And we have transparency in the way that the decision was reached and maintained and communicated. And then when we're talking about transparent development, we want to make sure that we're collaborating while code is written. And this is another big hurdle that we see in terms of cultural adoption of InnerSource and open development practices. And the best way I can talk about this is to talk a little bit about how most engineers at GitHub approach open development. And that's to the point where a lot of folks will go in and create a pull request and with a carriage return, maybe a couple of lines of comments, and a failing test that idea to do X, Y, Z. Here's roughly in the code where I think I build that out. Here's a couple of failing tests that I'm going to use to build off of. And then the conversation starts there. Or the conversation starts at 20 or 30% completion, as opposed to 80 or 90% completion. And the reason we encourage that is so that anybody can raise any potential blockers, issues, or concerns early. Because we want to reduce the code churn that inevitably comes when somebody holds onto their code and says, you can't see what I'm working on until it's ready. I show up at the code review meeting, I'm all excited to share stuff with you. It's at 90, 95% in my mind, we're ready to go. 2 or 3 people will throw up their hand and say, that's not going to work, that's going to break this, this, and this, and it's going to fail here. Then I got to go back, and I'm back at 30%, and I've got to rework, and all that churn is lost time, energy, effort, money, whatever you want to apply into that. So by opening up development and by having the entire development process happen in the open, and by watching people contribute to code as it's changing before it's merged, we can surface those concerns earlier on, and we also enable people to kind of watch and see and learn how software development is happening within the organization. So this all sounds great. We create this open environment. Repositories are open for people to go and look at. People are free to propose changes. They've got all this information available to them. And if anyone has ever sat and stared blankly at the 36 jars of pasta sauce on the shelf at the grocery store, you realize you get overwhelmed by the amount of choice and information that's thrown at you. So just throwing this stack of information and throwing these capabilities at people is not magically turn them into active participants within an InnerSource culture. It's this whole, you can lead the developer to water, but you can't make them drink mentality. So how do we turn turn people into just passive users of software, going out and grabbing it, and turn them into active participants within a software development community, whether we're talking about open source or InnerSource. And I'm borrowing this graphic here from a colleague of mine, Mike McQuaid. If any of you run Homebrew on your Macs, you may know Mike. He's a GitHubber. He created the Homebrew project. And he has this nice, useful way of looking at how do we get people down the funnel from just passive users of the software to contributors that I'm actually actively participating in the development of that software, and maybe at some point being a maintainer who's taking an active role in determining the direction of that particular software package. And so when we start talking about software development, this is where we really start talking about it being a participatory sport. It's, we've got users who are out there and they're really only looking to discover software and install it. So we want to make sure that whenever we're creating software, we have to make it ridiculously easy for people to go discover and find what they're looking for and use it as part of their daily work. Then we want to make sure that we have a path forward for those contributors, because we want to be able to reduce the friction to encourage people to contribute to the project. Friction can be a lot of different things. Friction can be, it's really hard to get set up. I don't know how to get started or where to get started to start contributing back to this particular library. And here it's really important to consider what a contribution is, because contributions to enterprise applications come in a lot of different forms. One might be as simple as people stopping by to open up an issue. And this is another cultural shift that tends to happen too, because some people will think that, well, somebody who's going to come by and open up an issue with my software who's never touched it before, well, what business do they have telling me what problems there are? And this is actually, what I would argue is this is a healthy pattern, because somebody is invested enough in that particular application, concerned about it enough that they want to raise a potential concern with you. Whether that might be a bug or a, hey, it might be great if this did this as well. There's value and there's success in getting more people involved just from a discussion perspective. Then there are folks who can help improve documentation. These are maybe the technical writers, there are folks that are trying to use your application, because inevitably, the more time we spend with an application, the more time we know intrinsically how it works on the inside, the crappier we're going to be at writing documentation for it. It's just, we know how it works, we know the ins and outs of it. When somebody else goes through and tries to install it, they're going to end up saying, hey, this doesn't make a lot of sense. You get people that start contributing back to the documentation. Then, more and more, as we start peeling back and getting people to become more active participants, then people might offer insight in an issue or PR, ideas, possible directions of the code. It's another form of contributing. And then the last two are really the holy grails that we're trying to get toward in open source and InnerSource. And that's where people swing by with unsolicited improvements. Like, hey, this seemed really cool. I wanted to do this. Here's a proposed change with all the tests passing. What do you think? Believe it or not, it does happen from time to time. And then there's also the knocking out the backlog or the roadmap. Because inevitably, I'm sure just about everyone here who's managing a project has got a backlog of low-hanging, low-impact fruit. So yeah, that stuff's easy. We'll get to it when we get to it. And the low-priority, low-hanging fruit stuff for you from a PM might be really important to someone else who wants to use your software. So by making it available, by making it open within the company, suddenly you're basically advertising, hey, come fix our stuff. Or, you want to use this? Yeah, just go ahead and knock out that backlog. And this might seem foreign, this might seem impossible, but it actually starts happening quite a bit in organizations where people start taking those vested interests in those software repositories and using them across the organization. Like, oh, hey, this is great, I'll just go knock this out quickly for that person. And so how do we help people contribute in one or more of those ways? We want to reduce the friction that's involved with contributing to enable successful InnerSource. So we want to reduce the friction required to submit feedback, to get up and running, to make sure stuff works, and to help people find where they can jump in and start contributing. So when we start talking about, we'll get back to ways that we can do that in a second. The last thing that we want to do in terms of being participative, we have our users, we have contributors, and then we have maintainers. And maintainers can be one person, it can be a team, it can be a group within the organization. But the maintainers do a number of important things for any repository. They set the vision and direction for the software. This is a middleware library that's going to transform data from X to Y. This is a front-end framework for interacting with XYZ system. Then they also document the processes. This is how we expect you to contribute back to us. This is what we're looking for from software contributions. These are the standards we have. They also set and maintain the tone and culture. In an open source community, this tends to be a little bit more important than an InnerSource community, since you all have codes of conduct you sign when you agree to work here, that you're basically not going to be a jerk to other people. But it's important that they set and maintain a tone of openness and inclusiveness and collaborative nature within that repository, so that when somebody opens up a request or somebody comes in with an idea, they are met with a human who can interact with them on a human level, not just a cold yes or no. Because inevitably, your first experience when you're jumping in as a newbie into open source development, if you get a really positive experience and you work really well with whatever community you're trying to participate within, you're more likely to come back. And you're more likely to contribute more to that library and others. If you've got a negative first experience, you're more likely to not go back in at all anymore. And so we've been looking at how do we make that first time or that new contributor experience useful for folks, both from an open source perspective and from an InnerSource perspective, and what are the patterns that help people come back and contribute more. Those maintainers also then basically choose what makes it into the repository and what doesn't, and they facilitate shared ownership as the need for maintaining that grows. So as we start looking at all of these different constructions, inevitably organizations will, by default, could create software patterns and software libraries that map to their org structure. So we end up reinforcing our org structure over and over again with software. And there's a lot of great writing out there. If you want to Google it, take a writing on what folks are calling the inverse or reverse Conway maneuver, which is basically how do we change the way that we structure our environment, how do we change how we structure our teams and our organizations to get these software outcomes we're looking for. So we want distributed microservices architecture. What are the ways that we need to structure our organization in order to develop software that looks like this? Now, I think that that's great, I think that that's awesome, and I think that that's a darn near impossibility in large companies, because you as a software development organization had to show up and say, hey, let's reorg everyone, because it's going to be awesome. And HR will just look at you and laugh, and say, no, that's not going to happen. So what can we do instead to kind of cheat the system here a little bit and make sure that we can create teams that are going to function this way in the light of rather immutable existing organizational structures, such as this. So we're going to switch now, and we're going to start talking about kind of some strategies to achieve these ends that I kind of went through here. And the first thing that I want to talk about is that organizational structure and that team structure. So inevitably within an organization, you've got a lot of different development groups that map to somewhere on the org chart. And so for purposes of today's talk, we're going to map this to org, which we'll call humanitas / the team, dev group A, dev group B, and dev group C. We've got teams like this to make sure that each appropriate dev group has the appropriate read, write, administrative permissions to whatever repository are out there. But it doesn't necessarily help us with that collaborative, cross-cutting team structure that we're looking to get from following the reverse Conway maneuver and actually changing our team structure around to match what we're looking to achieve. So what can we do instead? Well, one of the things that we really encourage folks to do is to use a mixture of formal and informal teams. And these informal teams become one of the ways that we facilitate a lot of knowledge sharing across organizations. And informal teams are great because they can be used for a lot of different things. For one, they allow people to solicit help. I'm going to use JavaScript as an example, as a generic JavaScript one. If I'm new to JavaScript and I'm beating my head against my desk because I can't get the darn thing to render properly in Edge, JavaScript errors are usually a Microsoft issue, I can go ahead and raise my hand and mention the Humana/JavaScript team and say, hey, Humana/JavaScript, and can somebody help me figure out this Edge rendering issue that I'm having? And someone from the team, everyone in the team will get a notification. If somebody's got some bandwidth, they'll open it up, and if they're able to jump in and answer, they might try to help you out. The second is that these informal teams allow us to learn from others. And I'm going to share a personal experience within this one. I am not a great Ruby developer, but I work with a lot of great Ruby developers. And so I occasionally will contribute code back to GitHub.com, and most of that's written in Ruby. So I've joined a couple of teams, Ruby teams at GitHub, where I'll get notifications when those teams are talking about different things, and I can just jump in and lurk. And this is where lurking is actually an okay thing to do, because I get to watch other people talk about and look at the challenges they're having in XYZ topic area, and learn from them through absorbing that information. In eras and realities where training budgets are tight, and nobody's got time to go sit through classes, and most people don't necessarily learn best in the classroom environment, having a way to easily watch conversations around code that I have a vested interest in is really useful within an organization to learn what is our approach to microservices architecture and delivery, what's our approach to working in React.js, whatever else that team structure might be around. And it allows people then to develop expertise. I then transform from the person passively watching the conversation to the person occasionally chiming in. And at some point, I can become a person offering help to those others that are asking questions, all by leveraging existing expertise within the enterprise development community. So that starts looking like this, and this is where we start getting these matrix organizations and cross-cutting teams without actually going back to HR and saying it's time to reorg. Because we can go ahead and get that JavaScript dev team that cross-cuts all of our different development organizations, or maybe it's a team around SQL or security or whatever else we might want to organize by. Now we have the ability to let folks participate in these conversations, interact with developers they may have never met before internally within the company, and create communities of software around not only just general software development because everybody's in GitHub, but communities of very particular interests that can interact with one another and help one another. And then it's governed. So we've got inevitably policies and procedures in place to prevent people from just doing whatever they want and bringing down production systems. And so these policies and procedures exist generally around how do I report an issue, how do I propose a change to the code, and what is the code of conduct for working in this particular organization or repository. And then, of course, enforcement of those governances through automated checks, through maintainers that take on some of that role and help enforce policy on those changes. So again, that massive stack of information is going to magically transform people down that funnel from passive users into collaborators and contributors and maybe even maintaining the software. So it's important to set everything up and make it easy for people to move down that funnel as they choose to. So what does that look like? Let's talk about strategies to help people discover and use content, strategies to help people contribute content, and then strategies to make it easier for the maintainers of repositories to maintain that content. So the first thing we want to do is we want to help people find and use your project, because reuse only happens if you can find it and you can then use it. So what do we want to do? The first thing that I'd encourage within GitHub is to use a global organization to promote collaboration and facilitate discovery. And well, what do I mean by that? If you're familiar with GitHub.com, GitHub organizations are designed to keep competitors' code separate. So you're running GitHub Enterprise, which is a cut of production GitHub.com code. It's the same code that's powering our global site packaged up locally, which means organizations on GitHub Enterprise have the same firewalls in place between them that organizations on GitHub.com do, where we're keeping competitors' code and collaboration and discussion apart from one another. So architecturally, what I mean by this, everything kind of exists in GitHub Enterprise in a particular environment. So you've all got user accounts, and you've all got your own namespaces to go off and develop projects in and experiment and try stuff. And organizations also have their own namespace and own most of the repositories, as we all know. What's really important, though, is those teams. When we start talking about using informal teams for collaboration and using teams to assign stuff, teams are a unique construct of a singular organization. It's part of that firewall in place to keep disparate groups apart. So if we want to be able to promote people collaborating across the development organization through these informal teams, through these areas of expertise, it becomes a significant challenge to maintain multiple instances of those teams across all of the different organizations. We're all working, I'm going to say we, you're all working for Humana, you're all contributing to the same code base. It kind of makes sense to keep you all in an organization with all of the teams set up there, because these folks over here are not necessarily competitors, as they would be on GitHub.com. They're your colleagues, so why set up those walls in between them? The only thing that I will say is I do have a couple of customers using 2 or 3 different organizations like this in cases where they are using heavily outsourced IT, specifically in China, and they had concerns over IP protection law and copyright protection law. And I do have a couple of customers that use separate organizations for contracted work with the DoD, where they absolutely want to make sure there's no possibility that somebody could inadvertently apply the wrong permission and cause DoD code to be exposed to everyone in the company. So there are certainly use cases for multiple organizations, but we really want to encourage people to start with one and then add another one as necessary. So in addition to you collaborating in that single organization, another thing that helps people get up and running and become users is to make sure that you've got multiple forms of documentation aimed at the appropriate audience. And so when I like to think of documentation, I think of 3 different audiences. You've got the end users, people who just need to grab that library, grab that application, and use it for whatever its purpose is. You've got contributors who are going to be actually actively contributing to the code base and maintaining that code. And then you've got the general public, with air quotes, for lack of a better term, being the general audience of anyone who happens to work at Humana. And the documentation for those tends to be a little different. So GitHub obviously provides lots of different opportunities for documentation, including readme.md, which is a great way to keep documentation in the code. Some folks either don't know or don't take advantage of the fact that readme.md renders at every folder level. So you can use a readme.md in every folder of your code that you want to explain to folks that are contributing to the code and looking through the code what's happening in this folder. So I've got a scrolling example here from the Atom. Like Atom, the docs folder in Atom's got another readme.md that explains what are each of the docs files that we're looking at here. Similarly, you can do that in your views, whatever else you feel you need to drop in that documentation into code. The next one that I want to highlight, which I know that you all are making use of here, are wikis. And I think they're probably the most underused aspect of GitHub. And in part, it's because we have pages and we have readme.md, and in part because, wikis are, they're not a sexy media wiki sort of splashy thing, but they're really useful, and they kind of allow people to quickly and easily create multi-page documentation. And the cool thing about wikis is that they actually exist as Git repos. So you can clone the wiki repo down locally to your machine, contribute to it, and push back to it in the same way that you would the actual code itself. And then lastly, GitHub Pages. And there are a couple of different interesting use cases for GitHub Pages. This right here is definitely one that's aimed more at the general public. And so this is the BFG repo cleaner, which if you spent any time in the early 90s playing a lot of id Software games, this is a direct reference to the BFG from Doom. It gets rid of everything that's clogging up your repository history. But this is really designed to be kind of a general public. What is this thing? What does it do? How do I go find more information and get it? It's a nice single-page site. This was actually generated using the automatic page generator directly in GitHub, so you don't have to know any Jekyll to generate a site. GitHub pages can also, of course, host multi-page sites. So if you want to, again, have the documentation live in the code, drop it in the docs folder, publish the Jekyll site directly out of the docs folder, and now you can make sure that all of your documentation exists directly within your code. So that's where we can start enforcing things during pull request reviews. You're going to go add a new method, you're going to go add a new parameter to a method. You better make sure that as a developer, you go into the documentation, update the table, update the line in documentation where that explains what you're doing. Now we're making sure that the documentation stays in sync with the repository, and as soon as we merge that pull request, the documentation gets rebuilt, and the latest documentation is already available. So again, whether we're using GitHub Pages to do that, here, this is actually Facebook's GitHub.io site, GitHub Pages site on the public internet, and they use it as a blog. Basically highlight what are the cool things that Facebook is doing from a technology and development perspective, where are our neat open source repos that you want to go look at. The cool thing about GitHub Pages from an internal perspective is I've got a number of customers that use it to basically write internal blogs. A DevOps team at one of my customers publishes weekly blog posts to everyone in the company basically saying, what's the DevOps team up to? What are the new teams? Or what are the new tools, new practices that we're bringing in? GitHub Pages also doesn't require anyone to have a GitHub seat license. So you can use it as a publication and broadcast platform to everyone within Humana to just say, again, what's the digital experience that are doing? What's my particular team doing? It's a great way to share out information. So once we've done all that, we also want to make sure that people can find related repositories easily. And a lot of people will get a little bit of heartburn when I say one organization because they'll think, well, I've got 18 organizations and each division has its own repositories under that. Or how do I make sure that I know, have that same level of hierarchy and organization within my structure? And that is where topics come in. And topics are a relatively new feature within GitHub Enterprise, which allow for repository admins to go and add topics to any repository. And so topics are really powerful on GitHub Enterprise when folks start to use them to tag the team or teams responsible for maintaining that particular repository, the system or systems in which that repository rolls up into, or other unique aspects of it, whether that be a development language or anything else. So in this case here, this happens to be a Chrome extension that rolls up through productivity. But if I just pop up over here into Electron, and I can see here there are a number of different topics, I can quickly click on a particular topic like JavaScript right here. It helps to have an internet connection. Live demo. Imagine, if you will, suddenly a list of all of the repositories that have that tag. Look at all of the repositories that roll up into XYZ system. Look at all repositories Team 3 is responsible for. Oh, hey, my internet connection's back. Look at all the repositories that roll up into that tag. So again, this is a nice way to go ahead and categorize that stuff and quickly and easily retrieve that information without building up all of those silos for every organization to keep all that stuff grouped together. All right, so now the internet connection is working, let's not be away from the internet. So we just saw Electron, I did all that. And then using releases to catalog versions, release notes, and binaries. Another underutilized aspect of GitHub, but every repository page has a releases page, and if you're cutting releases either automated through the API or manually through here, you can go tag any point in your Git history as a release, provide release notes, provide links to the artifacts in an artifactory or your artifact management system if you have one, or you can just upload them directly in GitHub and provide a nice download page for folks to go and grab any and every possible release of the software. Again, just trying to aid that discovery process. So once we've helped people find your repository and use it, how do we help people become contributors and actually start contributing code to that? So they aren't just passive users of it, they actually start helping to become better and getting a more vested interest in it. And a lot of that comes in reducing the friction that is involved with contributing, because depending upon what you've done in the repository, it can either be really easy to jump in and get working, or it can be pretty hard. So how do we make it easy to do all of those things that we talked about earlier? So the first thing we want to do is reduce the friction required to get up and running. And that's where we start doing script all the things. So every repository that you want to be successful in an Innersourcing perspective should have basically a single script to rule them all. A script to go ahead and bootstrap everything, make sure all the dependencies are in place so that I can run it. A script to actually run that, script/server if you happen to be running in Node.js. And script to run all the tests to make sure that I haven't broken anything while I'm experimenting with this particular repository. Then we want to make sure that there is the least amount of friction possible for people to submit a contribution. So I'm up and running locally in my environment. I've hacked away on some stuff. I've got it up and running. And that's where things like issue templates and pull request templates come in. We can't force people to tell us all the information we're looking for, but we can strongly encourage them to. So rather than have somebody open up an issue and say, it's broke, or open up a PR and say, added this, we can use an issue underscore template.md and a pull underscore request underscore template.md to pre-populate that box in the repository and make people manually go in and either delete the stuff we're asking for, or more easily just go ahead and type in the response underneath the line. So in this case, the template is asking me to describe the change, I can replace it here, and then as I go through, describe the other approaches I might have considered, talk about the benefits, any possible detriments, everything else. So whatever you're looking for in XYZ repository, just go ahead and explicitly require people to actively put that in, or at least know that it was there and delete it. Huh? Oh, we did? All right. I also have a contributing.md folder. Again, this is where if you drop contributing.md into any repository, anytime anybody opens up an issue or pull request, they're going to be asked to follow the contributing guidelines. So that's where you can say, please refer back to the contributing for how we're structuring this, tests, semantics, all sorts of other things. I'm running short on time because I'm long-winded. There are a couple other high points I want to highlight too. Make sure stuff works. Tests and CI, so write tests, test coverage, require minimum test coverage, make sure the tests are passing before it gets merged. And just remember that we are more receptive to pedantic feedback from robots than people. So let's let the robots be pedantic and we can focus on the more important things. Again, we won't make this, but take a look at XKCD 1833 and a few of the other ones for people insulting other people's code styles. That's not what we want. Let's let the robots take care of that. So we can let the robots do all sorts of interesting things. In this case here, we were talking about blog posts earlier. We've got a lot of CI checks that we run on blog posts before we actually put them on our public blog. So we actually do a build. We actually then look at a calendar to make sure we aren't getting blog posts stacked up on top of each other. We also run two things. This is blog post insensitive and blog post write good, which are great tests. This one right here actually is the insensitive one that looks for gender-specific language, and so that we can actually go through and like, yep, okay, maybe we want to use gender-neutral language here. This is that. This is correct. This is not. And we can also run like verb ones like active, passive voice, and all these different things. You can try this all in your documentation too. These are actually all open source repositories available directly on GitHub. If you're interested in them, that's where to go get them. And we want to make sure that people can find ways to contribute. And one of the greatest ways to do that is with labels. So if you go to a lot of open source projects or InnerSource projects, we've seen a couple different frameworks. Like help/beginner is one that a lot of folks use. Like, hey, where are the things that I can go and start contributing that don't require a lot of knowledge? Internally within GitHub, we call them bite size or fun size. Just basically, again, that low-hanging fruit that people can come find. And lastly, how do we equip people to maintainers for success? Customize your labels. Take a look at Electron. They've got them color-coded and text-coded. It's amazing how many people I come across that never actually edit the default labels in every repository. And you can chain a lot of really cool if-then behavior off of labels, off the API, so use them effectively. Milestones, if you're working in an Agile framework, milestones are a great way to group issues and pull requests together and give them a deadline. They map really well to sprints, and they're a great way to keep all of your Agile planning in GitHub and not have to use all sorts of other solutions on top of it. Projects, again, if you like the cards and columns view, every GitHub repository has the ability to drop your issues and pull requests into cards and columns as you're looking to customize them. Cards and columns can exist within an individual repository, and they can also exist within the organization, so you can drop in cards and columns from lots of different repositories, because inevitably a project will probably touch more than one repo. And that was my bust through the end. So really, when we're talking about InnerSource, we're looking at how do we take the aspects of open source, the open collaborative development, and the asynchronous communication through issues and pull requests, the enforcement of tests and CI, and the ability to allow people to openly contribute, but control and maintain those contributions for quality and map them to success, and make sure that we can take those and pivot that from the open source community into internal development communities to get better outcomes. With that, I do want to make sure I have time for questions and to finish up our fun quiz to give away prizes. So let's branches, organizations, labels, or repositories? Hint, we may have talked about this a little earlier. All right. And one, that answer is labels. Allows you to quickly and easily categorize work items in GitHub. All right. Tim Roth, we have a new leader. Hey, there's Tim. All right, question 5. Which feature of GitHub helps manage large files? Is it gists, Git LFS, GitHub Pages, or Git submodules? I've got a lot of large files, maybe PSDs or movies or audio that have to exist with a recording. Git LFS is the answer. Git LFS is pretty cool. It allows for you to make. Tim Roth, again, doing well. Which of the following features can help enforce security and audit compliance measures? 2FA, commit signing, pre-receive hooks, or all of the above? All the above. There we go. And last question. This command reapplies commits from the active branch to the tip of another branch. This is the technical one here. Is it git reset, git merge, git rebase, or git stash? Git rebase. Awesome. So, get results. Actually, we got them right here. So if you are Tim Roth, Ephemeral Pork, Nikila, Anastasia, or Ash15, come up and see Craig or me at some point before we leave here. Make sure we've got your mailing address where you'd like us to send the semi-fabulous prize package and a t-shirt size. And we'll make sure to get some stuff out to you. So with that, Craig and I will be around. Thanks everyone for coming. If you got questions, feel free to ask them. Come on up.